The security badge clicked red, not yellow, not delayed, red. That was the first sign. I was standing outside the East Annex, coffee in one hand, ID in the other, staring at a scanner I'd installed myself back in 2012. It had never once malfunctioned. Not during the great outage of 2015, not when two interns accidentally deleted half the building's access logs in 2019. Never. Until today. I tapped again, slowly, then again, faster. The third time, the little LED strip didn't even blink. It just sat there, cold and blue, like the eyes of the new VP of Ops when he breezed through the morning meeting and forgot to acknowledge me. 18 years, and suddenly, I was a ghost in my own building. If you're listening and you've ever been blindsided at the finish line, right before everything you earned was supposed to come due, subscribe, like the video. It helps our team keep telling these stories. And trust me, it gets worse before it gets satisfying. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the security app. No access alerts, no flags, just a blank slate where my clearance should have been. My name, Cynthia Maddox. Status, inactive. I stood there for a minute, let it land. No panic, just a cold, creeping confirmation of what I'd felt brewing all week. A tightening of posture in meetings, a missing invite to the Thursday retirement lunch, the subtle absence of eye contact from department heads I'd trained. Halston Dynamics didn't forget my send-off. They erased it. And it started 3 days before I was set to retire, with my full $1.3 million bonus finally due. Not a penny early, not a day late. That was the deal. Structured in my 2017 retirement agreement, reviewed, re-signed in 2019 after I caught a freight routing loophole that saved them $22 million, my reward was simple. Work until Friday, retire with grace, and collect what I'd earned. Except now, it was Wednesday, and my badge said I didn't exist. I walked around to the main lobby. Security was newer now, outsourced, poorly trained, but polite. The kid at the front desk looked like he'd just graduated high school. He squinted at his monitor like it might bite. Ms. Maddox? It says here you've been deactivated. I raised an eyebrow. Since when? It just says effective 7:02 a.m. today. Of course. Right after the overnight batch process. The same one I'd helped design to automate HR transitions. Can you buzz me through? He hesitated, then said, the thing I knew was coming but still wanted to punch drywall over. I'm really sorry. I'm not allowed to override terminations. Terminations, not retirements, not scheduled offboarding. Terminations. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. That's the luxury of being betrayed by people you never fully trusted. Instead, I turned, left the lobby, got into my Civic, drove home in silence, and logged in remotely. And sure enough, my admin access was still active. At least for now. My heart didn't race, but my fingers were already typing faster than my thoughts could catch up. I opened the archive, pulled up the signed retirement agreement, scanned down to Section 18C, a clause so specific, so buried, most people forgot it existed. Termination without cause within 72 hours of scheduled retirement shall trigger full disbursement of all bonuses and deferred equity. Plus a line I'd almost forgotten, added during renegotiation in 2019 after my freight audit brought them international compliance. Failure to disburse said funds within 48 hours of vesting date shall trigger compound penalty at prevailing market rate plus 11%. My system had logged the change, time-stamped, notarized, synced across backup nodes I'd personally built when the vendor system kept losing daylight savings, the very system Halston Dynamics still used to track terminations, and it had just triggered the clause. They thought firing me 2 days early would save them $1.3 million. Instead, it started a clock they couldn't stop. The HR email came in at 8:14 a.m. Monday morning. No greeting, no warmth, just a line that felt like it had been scrubbed of any trace of human fingerprints. We'll confirm timing shortly. That was it. No attachments, no offboarding docs, no link to the pension disbursement portal. Just that one antiseptic sentence, like I was some invoice they forgot to process. That's when the flicker of doubt started to crawl in. I sat there at my kitchen table, same spot I'd worked remote from during the pandemic, where I'd wrangled global shipments from backlogged ports and rerouted seven-figure logistics failures without ever once missing a deadline. Same seat I'd occupied during Zoom calls with 3 layers of execs asking how we'd meet ISO recertification by Q4. and now they couldn't even send me a standard farewell packet? I opened my retirement folder, one I kept backed up twice, locally and off-site. Call it paranoia, I called it insurance. There it was, the original 2017 agreement. PDF, signed in ink, later notarized for my own record. My name, Cynthia Maddox. Effective date of retirement, March 17th, 2026. Terms, clean, simple, bulletproof, until I got to Section 18C. Termination without cause within 72 hours of a planned retirement date will trigger full disbursement of all accrued bonuses, stock equity, and incentives. And then I saw what I hadn't remembered. Amendment 18C2 added after the 2019 renegotiation. Failure to fulfill payout obligations within 48 hours of vesting shall incur a compounding interest penalty, calculated at current prime rate plus 11% per hour. I leaned back in my chair, stared at it. My hand wasn't shaking, but I could feel my blood get colder. Because if I'd forgotten that clause, and I'd drafted half of it, then someone had definitely remembered. Not legal, not payroll, someone higher, someone who knew that clause meant the clock started ticking the moment they touched my termination date. It wasn't a glitch, it was a gamble. They'd bet on my silence. I closed the contract and opened my sent items, searched for every message to HR over the past 3 months. There it was, the timestamp on my final retirement confirmation, sent 3 weeks ago. Subject line, final offboarding confirmation, March 17th. Their reply had been warm then, friendly even. Looking forward to celebrating your legacy, Cynthia. What changed? Or more accurately, who changed? I pulled up the org chart. Moxley, Daniel Mai Moxley, new VP of Ops, transferred in from some venture-backed supply chain software firm on the West Coast. Hadn't lasted more than 15 months at his last 3 jobs, probably hired by someone who wanted a flashy resume and didn't care about institutional knowledge. He'd cut 3 departments already, made waves streamlining legacy personnel. It was the kind of language that looks good on investor decks and burns real people alive. I wasn't legacy personnel. I was the one who built the legacy. But that's the problem, isn't it? When you're too quiet about what you've done, people start to think you didn't do anything. And when you don't posture, they assume you'll never push back. Well, Moxley didn't know what system he just set in motion. Because the one thing Halston never understood about me, I never raised my voice. I wrote the rules, and I never forgot how to read them. Thursday morning, the building smelled like burnt coffee and last-minute decisions. My calendar had said final systems wrap-up. Instead, I got a summons. HR conference room. No explanation. Just a meeting invite with a 9 a.m. timestamp and a subject line that didn't bother with punctuation. Maddox meeting, not retirement review, not farewell. Just my name like it was a problem to be solved. I walked in and knew immediately. No coffee, no goodbye bag. Just Daniel Moxley, Mr. Startup Sleaze himself, sitting across the table in a $900 blazer and loafers that had never seen mud. Didn't look up from his tablet. Didn't even greet me. Just a little sigh, like I was keeping him from whatever shiny bullshit idea he was planning to shove into ops next. We've decided to accelerate your offboarding, effective immediately. Just like that. No, thank you for your years of service. No, we're grateful for your legacy. Not even a line about corporate restructuring to soften the fall. Just a flat announcement, as if firing someone 2 days before their scheduled retirement wasn't the professional equivalent of stealing from their casket. He slid the termination letter across the table like he was handing me a receipt. Termination. Effective March 13th, 9 a.m. Reason, organizational efficiency review. That was rich. I glanced at the door. One-way glass. I could see the hallway, but no one outside could see the slow murder of my career inside. Smart design. Cowardly use. Moxley still didn't look up, just tapped something on his tablet like this was routine, like I was routine. I looked at the letter, then back at him. That's final? He gave the slightest nod. So I stood, smoothed the sleeves of my blazer, buttoned the middle one like I was about to walk into a courtroom instead of a parking lot. I didn't flip the table, didn't yell. I'd done something far scarier years ago. I'd buried the trigger claws deep in their own infrastructure. The silence in the room was surgical, the kind that tells you everyone thinks you're gone, dusted, defeated. I walked out. HR didn't make eye contact. Some junior coordinator offered a thin smile like she was apologizing for the weather. No box of memories, no escort, no "we'll miss you." just a locked badge and a folder labeled separation. Cute. I stepped outside and felt the weight of nothing. Not regret, not grief, just absence. The space where 18 years of quiet excellence used to sit, now replaced by the stench of managerial cowardice wrapped in corporate spin. I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes, engine off, phone in my lap. Then I smiled. Not the kind of smile that says, "This is fine." The kind that says, "Check the timestamp, asshole." Because the system I'd built, the one they still use to log terminations, bonus vesting, HR events, and security rollovers, it didn't just delete data, it archived it, backed it up, flagged anomalies, calculated penalties, sent internal alerts for violations of retirement clauses, especially Section 18C. And the best part? It did it automatically. They hadn't canceled my payout. They just started the meter. By noon, the silence broke. But not from Halston. From me. My attorney, Meredith, didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. We'd built the contingency plan together 3 years ago, after another company tried something similar with one of her clients. She was ready before I even finished explaining what happened. "Standard Halston stunt," she muttered. "They love rolling the dice when they think someone's too close to retirement to fight back." She uploaded the package to their legal team at 12:07 p.m. on the dot. Secure drive, time-stamped receipt. Everything they thought they could ignore now lived in a little red folder titled Maddox 18C Claim, Immediate Response Required. Inside that folder, my full retirement contract. Section 18C, bolded, boxed, and annotated. The clause they'd pretended didn't exist. The clause that made my termination not just shady, but legally radioactive. We included everything. A notarized timeline of my retirement process, signed and dated by HR. 6 months of calendar logs confirming the March 17th retirement date. A paper trail of HR correspondences acknowledging the date, including the January email where they'd congratulated me and offered to schedule a farewell lunch. The farewell email draft my department head had written but never sent. The badge access audit showing my clearance revoked precisely 26 hours before my scheduled retirement. They didn't just fire me early. They detonated a tripwire buried in their own system, one I had built, calibrated, and documented across 3 layers of compliance. And here's the thing about legacy systems. They remember. They don't care about new VPs or shifting budgets. They don't give a damn about someone trying to cut costs with a half-brained termination stunt. They log, they archive, they warn. I logged in again just to see the flag. The red banner was already active in the back end. 18C breach detected. Penalty clock active. Meredith and I didn't send threats. No angry phone calls. No demand letter drafted on flaming paper. Just data, dates, documents, the facts. Because when you've done everything by the book, all you have to do is open the book and point to the line that burns them. She added one final note to the submission. Short, sharp, and deadly. As per Section 18C, client will expect full disbursement plus any applicable interest per clause. 2. We are open to resolution, but are prepared to pursue litigation with confidence. Please advise promptly. It didn't sound aggressive. It sounded inevitable. They had options, sure. Delay, deny, spin it internally as a clerical error, but nothing was going to erase the timestamp of my badge being disabled 26 hours early. Or the audit trail showing Moxley's approval, or the auto alert the compliance system had already sent to the executive oversight inbox, an inbox I'd helped set up to detect unethical terminations. Moxley didn't know about that inbox, but the board did. That afternoon, Halston Legal went quiet. No reply, no call. Just a lot of blinking cursors on a document that told them they'd messed with the wrong line item. I didn't go for a walk, didn't vent. I poured myself a coffee, logged into the back-end audit dashboard, and watched as the counter ticked upward, calculating their debt to the second. Every blink was money. Every minute, another reminder that the quiet woman they discarded 2 days early. She didn't scream. She submitted receipts. Friday morning, before sunrise, they were already scrambling. My sources inside, people I'd mentored, trained, covered for when budgets got slashed, started pinging me quietly. No words, just screenshots. Need confirmation of retirement protocol timelines? Legal asking for templates from 2016. Moxley's assistant pulled 6 exec agreements from archives. They were digging, deep, trying to find a loophole, an old version, anything to prove my agreement was boilerplate, something they could wave off as standard language instead of the legal landmine it actually was. They weren't going to find it, because mine wasn't a template. It was customized, signed twice. Once in 2017, again in 2019, right after I caught a cascading liability in our raw materials contracts that would have left us exposed to a $22 million claim during a vendor audit. I didn't parade it around, I just fixed it, quietly, brought it to legal, documented the correction, closed the risk. The CFO at the time had asked me bluntly, "What do you want in return?" I'd said, "Just tighten Section 18 and make sure I can retire without games." She smirked. "We'll bake it in. Quiet clause. You earned it." So they did. They didn't realize that favor, given in a moment of gratitude, would become the fuse under their feet. I had leverage, and I'd stored it somewhere they'd never think to look, inside their own systems. Because Halston Dynamics had always loved one thing more than their quarterly bonuses: automated compliance. The digital audit trail, real-time tracking. Smart HR. They bragged about it in investor decks: real-time HR visibility, dynamic role management, automated audit logging. Know who built that system? Me, not in name. They brought in a glossy vendor to slap a UI on it, but the engine, the core logic, the logging framework, all mine. I'd spent 3 years embedding it, brick by brick, a side project that became a backbone. Every access badge revocation, every contract timestamp, every manager override, all of it logged, archived, and mirrored. They thought firing me 2 days early meant saving $1.3 million. But the second Moxley clicked that approval, his name got burned into a change log with action, early termination, retiree, Section 18C, triggered user, D. Moxley time, 03:13, 09:01, 04 a.m. Flag. Clause breach, penalty timer active. It wasn't just a warning, it was a countdown. They were racing it now, desperate, legal pulling contract files, HR combing internal policy logs, finance calculating worst-case scenarios in quiet corners of spreadsheets they never thought they'd need. One of my former team leads sent me a message with no context. Moxley asked if the system could be retrospectively corrected. I told him the logs are immutable. I smiled, because I remembered that meeting. He'd asked once, early on, why I was so strict about audit trails. I'd said, because people with power forget, but systems don't. He thought I was being dramatic. He didn't realize I was writing the script of his own downfall. They weren't trying to pay me now, they were trying to make it look like they meant to all along. But it was too late. The system had already sent alerts to the risk committee and internal ethics compliance inbox. The board would see it next. Every hour they delayed cost them $6,200. Every mouse click left a footprint, and every attempt to erase me just made the evidence louder. Friday, 11:28 a.m., that's when it finally hit them. A junior compliance officer, Sasha, if memory serves, found it buried in the 2019 contract amendment. She'd been on the job 6 months. Fresh degree, still asked questions like they mattered, hadn't yet learned the art of corporate silence. But she read everything, and when she reached subclause 2 of Section 18C, she didn't skim it, she flagged it. She forwarded it up the chain with one subject line. Urgent? Interest clause, penalty triggered. Someone from legal replied, trying to wave it off as standard language. Sasha replied with a screenshot. Time-stamped system log, live timer, penalty engine engaged. The clause was clear, unambiguous. Failure to disperse funds within 48 hours of retirement date shall trigger hourly interest penalties, calculated at prevailing prime rate plus 11% compounded. The current estimate, 6,112.83 is per hour. Running, live, irrefutable. And the kicker? The system wasn't waiting for permission, because the system didn't require permission. It was built to calculate, not debate. Built by me, so it wouldn't be subject to the kind of human cowardice that lets people look you in the eye while stealing your future. I'd hard-coded the clause into the financial risk module back when Halston first pushed for full-stack compliance integration. They wanted automation. I gave them integrity. The kind that doesn't ask if you meant to violate policy, just logs the violation when you do. And now, that logic engine was calculating in real time, logging interest accruals, generating daily summaries, routing red alert memos to the ethics review inbox, the CFO alias, and if the clock hit noon without resolution, the audit committee chair. They had 27 minutes to initiate payout, send written confirmation, and manually override the penalty timer. Except they couldn't. Because Moxley, bless his ego, had disabled manual overrides when he streamlined legacy systems last quarter, called them unnecessary redundancy, said, if we trust our workflows, we don't need emergency fail-safes. He'd bragged about it on a call. I'd muted myself and laughed. And now, somewhere in legal, 3 paralegals were probably standing behind a partner, mouths tight, while he read a clause he didn't know existed inside a contract they thought was just another retiring employee's file. Except this employee had helped design the vault. The penalty report was growing by the second, each line item time-stamped. No padding, no mercy. I imagined the scene in the boardroom, someone flipping through pages, someone else dialing finance, the CFO demanding to know why she hadn't seen this sooner. Moxley pretending to be calm, then getting visibly flushed when someone asked the worst question you can hear in a compliance breach. Why didn't you escalate this earlier? Because Moxley had authorized the termination, his credentials, his timestamp, his final approval. And now, the system he'd tried to quietly retire was making his mistake very, very loud. Another alert fired at 11:35, penalty accrual projected to exceed $100,000 by Monday, 9 a.m., trigger, internal controls review, auto-scheduled. I'd built that scheduling engine too. They thought firing me saved them money. Now the system I left behind was sending them invoices by the hour. At 12:02 p.m., just as the penalty clock crossed the 48-hour threshold, my phone lit up. Sender, Halston Legal, subject, urgent, bonus disbursement confirmation requested. The body was polite. Desperate, but polite. One of those emails that pretends urgency is professionalism instead of panic. It started with a gentle nod to recent events, then quickly pivoted. We'd appreciate confirmation of your preferred wire transfer details to expedite settlement of your retirement package. Additionally, we'd welcome a discussion around a mutual non-disclosure agreement to preserve the integrity of all parties. I read it once, then again. Let it sit in my inbox like spoiled fruit. No apology, no ownership, not even the decency to say they were wrong. Just a request to close the coffin quietly. For my sake, of course, They wanted me to pretend the fire never happened, while the walls were still smoldering. I didn't reply. Didn't have to. Meredith did. She responded exactly 27 minutes later. No emotive language. No posturing. Just 3 lines that landed like a gavel. We confirm receipt of your message. As stated in the existing agreement, disbursement is due in full per the terms of Section 18C, with interest calculated in accordance with Subclause 2. All systems remain active. We see no need for further discussion at this time. No threats, just protocol. That's the trick, really. When someone tries to gut you at the finish line, they expect emotion. They expect you to beg, bargain, rage, make it messy so they can paint you as unstable, unreasonable, replaceable. But I wasn't unstable. I was precise. And that terrified them more than any screaming ever could, because now they weren't dealing with a disgruntled former employee. They were dealing with a legal instrument wrapped in quiet memory, a system they couldn't control, calculating a debt they couldn't untrigger. One of my old team members texted me, "Moxley just stormed out of risk review. Someone said he demanded the system be shut down." I replied, "It's not a system, it's a record. And records don't take sides, they just reflect." At 12:49 p.m., another email came in, this time from Halston's CFO, more formal, heavily lawyered, apologizing for administrative misalignment, promising that full disbursement is being processed immediately, and asking again, delicately, if we'd consider keeping details confidential for the benefit of long-standing institutional relationships. That line made me laugh. I had no interest in torching the company, but I also had no intention of cleaning up the blood they spilled and pretending it was wine. They didn't fire me because I was obsolete. They fired me because they assumed I was harmless, and now they were asking me for favors, calling it resolution. But this wasn't a settlement. It was a payout triggered by their own negligence, enforced by the infrastructure they forgot I still owned. Line by line, clause by clause, timestamp by timestamp. They built the gallows. I just made sure they followed the blueprint. Monday morning opened with a boardroom silence thick enough to drown in. They called it a routine compliance huddle. Everyone knew that was code for damage control. The audit team was already in the war room by 7 o'clock a.m. Screens pulled up, log loaded, legal pacing the hallway like they could somehow preempt the facts. But the system had already spoken. The internal dashboard, our holy grail of risk mitigation and HR oversight, now flashed red under my employee ID. 18C. Status, breached interest, accrual, active override, disabled. Trigger, D. Moxley, 03-13-26, 09-01-04 a.m. That last line, they read it out loud in the meeting, word by word. It landed like a gunshot. Moxley apparently had tried to frame it as a miscommunication, said I hadn't clearly disclosed the terms of my retirement agreement, that the clause was ambiguous, that legal hadn't been properly briefed, that IT hadn't documented things cleanly. Then someone, probably Sasha from compliance, God bless her, pulled up the change log, not the editable summary, the immutable log, the real source of truth. There it was, my offboarding approval, time-stamped, credentialed, and assigned directly to Daniel Moxley. No proxy, no assistant, his name, his login, his decision. Action, termination approval type, early offboarding, retiree, user, D. Moxley. Note, let's close this before Friday, unnecessary overhead. Result, 18C, trigger engaged, auto interest activated. Someone in the room actually coughed. Not a sick cough, a you're screwed cough. The board chair reportedly leaned forward and asked the only question that mattered. Did you know about the clause? Daniel paused. Too long. Then came the reply. She didn't highlight it. Wrong answer. Because the screen didn't care about his story. The screen cared about data. And the screen showed a different story entirely. It showed that I had confirmed my retirement date 6 months ago. It showed that HR acknowledged it, twice. It showed a series of internal memos scheduling my farewell week. It showed that Moxley, in his arrogance, had overridden my final clearance manually without review, the exact morning the clause began its countdown. And finally, at the bottom of the system's output, sat the one line that no one could spin. Bonus acceleration trigger, active. Per clause 18C. That line wasn't written by me, wasn't written by legal, wasn't written by Meredith or anyone in HR. It was written by a machine I designed. A flag built into the backbone of their system, written in neutral code, blind to politics, programmed only to recognize truth. They tried to fire me without paying what they owed. Instead, they fired a trigger. And now the trigger had called them out, on the record, in public, with no room to wriggle. Daniel reportedly stammered, said something about fixing it quietly, about escalation processes being unclear. But the damage was done. And no NDA was going to unsend that report to the full audit committee, because for the first time in years, the system spoke louder than the executives, and it remembered everything. By Wednesday afternoon, the wire cleared. $1,384,600, $100. Principal plus $84,600 in compounded interest. Down to the cent. No call, no apology, no we regret how this unfolded. Just a terse message from Halston Legal confirming transfer complete, followed by an attached PDF stamped final resolution, no admission of liability. They wanted it over. They wanted me quiet. And they hoped the deposit would be the period at the end of a sentence they tried to write without me. Meredith just laughed when she read the attached language. They still think this was an accident, she said, sipping her tea, still pretending they tripped into the grave they dug. I didn't laugh, because I knew better. I checked the system log one last time. My access had been fully terminated at 12:01 p.m. Tuesday, a clean severance. Sanitized. But not before I pulled a backup archive, legally and through channels, the changelog, the approvals, the override denial timestamps, a record of every choice they made, including the trigger Daniel Moxley set with his own hands. He was transitioned the next quarter. That's the term they used in the internal memo, transitioned. No explanation, no goodbye post, no email from the CEO, just gone. His LinkedIn went dark 2 days later. Last title listed, VP of Operations, Halston Dynamics, 2025 Twex. That hyphen did a lot of heavy lifting, but the part that really cemented everything came in Q2. Halston's earnings report, filed publicly, buried deep in the shareholder disclosures under one-time exceptional items. There it was, in black and white, line 73 on page 42. Retirement payout executed per Section 18C due to administrative misalignment. Administrative misalignment. That's what they called it. Not retaliation, not breach, not negligence. Just a harmless misfire in the great machinery of corporate life. But I knew better. It wasn't a misalignment. It was precision. They aligned perfectly with greed. And they triggered a clause they didn't understand, because they assumed I didn't understand it either. They broke the rules, I wrote. And the system? It didn't forgive. It didn't forget. It just ran the numbers like it always had. Now my name's off their books. My record's sealed, quiet, closed, but I kept the filing, framed it even, not for pride, for reminder. A one-line footnote that cost them 6 figures because they underestimated the wrong woman. The system remembered, and so did I.